I never thought that one day my own sister would ask me for $40,000. Not for something truly important, but for a wedding. For a single day that was meant to dissolve in the glitter of expensive outfits and the clinking of glasses. But the most painful part wasn't even the amount. The hardest thing was hearing the ringing confidence in her voice, the certainty that she was willing to treat the memory of our grandfather so frivolously for the sake of impressing strangers. "Melissa, please, just this once. You know how much this means to me and Tyler." Chloe's voice on the phone was deliberately sweet and pleading. It cracked in just the right places to have the greatest effect. I knew this trick all too well. In my 30 years, I had studied her entire arsenal, from a trembling lip to tears that appeared on cue. My sister was a true talent. She turned a plaintive tone into an infallible technique that worked on everyone around her. I was sitting in my bright office at the Hallmark Media headquarters in Overland Park. Outside the window, a neat, autumn sunlit Kansas stretched out, while on my monitor, the impassive figures of the quarterly report were frozen. The cold logic of those columns always calmed me. My job as a senior marketing director had taught me the most important thing: behind every dollar is someone's time and effort. That's why, when our grandfather left us an inheritance 2 years ago, I saw it not as a gift from fate, but as a special responsibility. It was the foundation he had laid for our future. He was a carpenter. His hands, covered in a network of wrinkles, smelled of pine shavings, varnish, and honesty. I remembered how, tired after a long shift, he would sit in the kitchen, his strong hands repairing my broken toy with incredible tenderness. Every extra bill, every dollar he saved, he set aside so that we, his granddaughters, could stand on our feet more confidently than he had. To me, his money wasn't just paper. It was the embodiment of his care and hope. For Chloe, as it turned out, it was just a sum with a few zeros, which she had managed to spend on fleeting whims and a beautiful life in less than a year and a half. "Chloe, we've already discussed this." My voice was steady, perhaps too calm. "I've helped you out of financial trouble twice. But I'm not paying for such a lavish wedding. You're making this so complicated." The softness in her voice vanished instantly, replaced by cold, sharp notes. "I just need $40,000. That's not that much money for you." "Not much money?" My fingers tightened around the smooth body of the phone. $40,000 is a year's salary for many people. It's a serious amount for anyone. "But you're just sitting on that money, doing nothing with it," she interrupted, her irritation growing. "You don't understand. Tyler's family, they're used to a completely different standard. His father owns a major construction company. I can't look modest next to them." My heart twisted unpleasantly. Grandpa had built houses with his own hands, pouring his soul into his work, creating a solid foundation for other families while scrimping on himself. And the thought that his labor, his $40,000, would turn into bubbles in champagne glasses, rose petals on the floor, and expensive catering in a single evening, it felt like a profound disrespect to his memory. "Chloe, you're 28 years old. You work at a recruiting agency. Why don't you and Tyler have a wedding you can actually afford? You don't get it." Her voice broke into high, petulant notes. "The invitations have already been sent out. We booked the Abbott in downtown Kansas City. The deposit is non-refundable. That's exactly why you should have thought about the budget before signing such serious contracts," I replied, trying to remain calm. Reason was my only anchor in this conversation. A silence hung on the line, so thick you could almost touch it. It pressed on my ears, filled with unspoken reproaches. Finally, Chloe spoke again, but her voice was unrecognizable. All emotion was gone, the petulant notes, the hurt. All that remained was a smooth, cold surface, like polished stone. "Fine. I see how it is. To you, family is just a word. Just don't be surprised if one day you need help and there's no one around." And before I could find the words to object, the line went dead with short, indifferent beeps. The call was over. I sat there, phone in hand, staring at its dark, blank screen. Her last words sent an unpleasant chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. Chloe had always been prone to drama, but this time her tone was different, calculated, deliberate, and for that reason, terrifying. I forced myself to take a deep breath, put the phone down, and tried to get back to work. I stared at the numbers on the screen again, hoping their strict logic would bring order to my thoughts. But my sister's phrase kept replaying in my head like a broken record, overlaying the columns of the report and making it impossible to focus. Our parents, Richard and Evelyn Reynolds, had always seen Chloe differently. To them, she was the sun around which the family universe revolved, the younger, charming daughter who was forgiven any whim. I was the reliable but distant planet in that orbit, having learned from a young age that I had to rely primarily on myself. But in recent years, their indulgence of her desires had become almost boundless. The phone on my desk vibrated quietly again. For a moment, my heart fluttered with the hope that it was Chloe, calling to apologize. But it was my mother's name on the screen. The message was short and hit like a blow. "I'm disappointed in your behavior, Melissa. Family is supposed to support each other, especially at such an important moment as Chloe's wedding." I reread the text several times, as if repetition could change its meaning, soften it. But no. The same cold, judgmental words. In that moment, in the silence of my own office, surrounded by silent charts, I felt a piercing, all-consuming loneliness. The 2 weeks following that conversation passed in absolute silence. No calls, no messages from Chloe, which was completely unlike her. Usually, after our arguments, she would quickly find an excuse to reappear, inventing another, urgent problem, that required my money or connections to solve. Her current silence felt unnatural, unsettling. It was like the tense, ringing calm before a powerful storm, when the air is thick with anticipation. I tried to push these thoughts away, burying myself in work. Spreadsheets, reports, strategic meetings. I clung to any task to avoid being alone with my thoughts. But somewhere deep down, I knew, this quiet couldn't last forever. Fortunately, Hallmark Media was launching a major advertising campaign for a fast-growing tech startup. The endless work hours, brainstorming sessions, and creative meetings became my salvation from the impending family storm. During a morning coffee break, my colleague Amanda, with whom I had worked side by side for 6 years, looked up from her mug of chamomile tea and stared at me intently. "You look completely exhausted," she said, her voice filled with genuine concern. "Is everything okay at home?" I absently stirred my cooling coffee, watching the small vortex in the cup, and gave a noncommittal shrug, not knowing what to say. "I think we're having some family difficulties," I admitted quietly, and those few words contained a universe of unspoken issues and old resentments. "Chloe wants me to pay for part of her wedding." I refused, and now the whole family is looking at me like I've done something terrible. Amanda sipped her tea and shook her head sympathetically. There was no judgment in her eyes, only the quiet understanding of a friend who had heard variations of this story many times before. "Melissa, you're one of the most generous people I know. Let me remind you, wasn't it you who rushed out of a meeting last year to pay for her tow truck? And the year before that, didn't you cover her unexpectedly large bill from the emergency clinic?" I gave a sad smile. She was absolutely right. Looking back, I could clearly see a repeating pattern. Chloe would create a crisis, I would rush to the rescue with my money, there would be a temporary truce, and then it would all start over again. "My parents have always been on her side," I added, feeling that familiar guilt, carefully cultivated over the years, stir in my chest again. So every time I thought about saying no, I felt like I was doing something wrong, going against the family. Amanda gently touched my hand with her warm palm, and the simple gesture brought unexpected comfort. "You know, maybe this is the moment when you need to draw a line," she said quietly but with unwavering confidence. "Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their own decisions." That evening, in the silence of my apartment, I couldn't shake a vague, nagging thought. Something told me there was something important in Grandpa's papers, some detail I had overlooked. Giving in to the impulse, I took the heavy folder of documents from the safe and spread the yellowed pages on the large dining table. At first glance, the will seemed perfectly simple and fair. All assets were to be divided equally between Chloe and me, with a short, fatherly admonition to manage the funds wisely. But as I began to reread every line with patience, one paragraph on the second page made me hold my breath. In dry legal language, it stated that if one heir attempted to exert undue pressure, resort to manipulation, or deceive the other to obtain their share, they would automatically be stripped of all rights to the inheritance. I froze, staring at those lines. It was as if Grandpa had somehow looked into the future and left this message for me. He had, it seemed, understood Chloe's character perfectly and foresaw that a moment might come when our sisterly trust would be threatened. In that instant, I felt his unseen support, as if his warm, wood-scented hand had rested on my shoulder. A sharp phone call pulled me from my thoughts. Mom was on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "Melissa, darling." Her voice was artificially cheerful, almost giddy with a joy that seemed entirely out of place. "I have wonderful news. Chloe wants to fix everything. She wants to forget all our disagreements and is organizing a family dinner in your honor. This Saturday, at the Capitol Grill in Kansas City." I automatically glanced at the calendar on the wall. My birthday was still a few weeks away. A dinner in my honor? Why now? "She asked me to tell you she's very sorry about our fight," Mom chirped, not letting me get a word in. "You know our Chloe, she takes everything to heart. It's just stress from the wedding, nothing more." I hesitated, feeling suspicion and a faint hope warring within me. My mother's words were like a soothing balm I desperately wanted to believe. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe I should give them a chance. The hope for reconciliation, however faint, proved stronger than my doubts. "Wonderful, so 7 p.m., Mom concluded, a note of undisguised relief in her voice. "Chloe will be so happy to see you." After the call, I sat for a long time in the deafening silence of my living room. On one hand, the invitation seemed like an olive branch, a long-awaited step toward reconciliation. On the other, it was too sudden, too theatrical to be genuine. A cold snake of doubt coiled inside me, but I consciously pushed it aside. I chose to lean into a faint hope rather than bitter experience. After all, this was family. And maybe, just maybe, a single dinner could help us turn the page and leave the hurt behind. I didn't yet know that I wasn't walking into a reconciliation dinner, but straight into a carefully laid trap. Saturday morning was gray and dreary. It wasn't pouring, but a fine, cold mist hung in the air, enveloping the city in a translucent haze. It felt as if nature itself was warning me, the evening would not be easy. All week, I had been trying to convince myself of Chloe's sincerity, but a sticky feeling of anxiety followed me relentlessly, like a shadow. As I got ready, I chose a classic, understated outfit, a light sheath dress and a dark coat, my hair pulled back in a sleek, neat bun. I wanted to look calm and collected. The image was my silent declaration. I was coming to this meeting with an open heart, but also with a sense of self-respect. The Capitol Grill in downtown Kansas City greeted me with warm lights, the smell of grilled meat, and the muted hum of satisfied voices. The hostess at the reception desk had a flawless, practiced smile, as if she had been waiting just for me. "Good evening, Ms. Reynolds. Your party is already seated. Please follow me." I frowned slightly. Party? For a family dinner, the words sounded too formal, too cold. We walked past the main dining room, where a lively, relaxed atmosphere prevailed under the soft lights, laughter, the clinking of glasses, fragments of conversation. But I was led further, deeper into the restaurant, toward a massive dark wood door, hidden from public view. When the hostess silently opened it, I froze on the threshold for a second, instinctively sensing a shift. The room inside had nothing in common with the coziness of a family dinner. Instead of a small, round table, a long, polished conference table stood in the center. And it wasn't just my family seated there. It was a full-fledged council. Chloe, in a bright dress, was next to our parents, Richard and Evelyn Reynolds. And on the other side sat 4 unfamiliar men in perfectly tailored business suits. In front of each of them, neat stacks of documents lay on the pristine surface of the table. The moment I walked in, all eyes turned to me, wary from my parents, cold and appraising from the strangers. Melissa. Chloe jumped up from her seat. The smile on her face was strained and bright, like a doll's. I'm so glad you could make it. Please, have a seat. Her voice sounded too loud in the tense silence. I didn't move, my feet felt rooted to the floor. The air in the room was thick and heavy. What is all this, Chloe? I asked, and my voice, to my own surprise, sounded calm but firm. Who are these people? One of the men, sitting opposite my sister, rose smoothly. His movements were measured and confident. He stepped forward and extended a hand, which I ignored. Ms. Reynolds, allow me to introduce myself. I am Michael Stanton, senior partner at the law firm Stanton and Pierce. And these are my colleagues, Mr. Harper, Mr. Caldwell, and Mr. Doyle. We are representing your sister's interests. I slowly scanned the table, and what I saw finally clicked into a single, suffocating picture. Unfamiliar faces. Folders of documents. For lawyers at a meeting that was presented as a family reconciliation dinner. The tight knot of anxiety that had been twisting inside me all day turned into a block of ice. Explain what is happening here, I said. My voice was surprisingly even, but it had a steel edge that made even the unflappable Michael Stanton raise his eyebrows for a moment. The icy premonition of disaster was no longer a premonition, it was reality. The porcelain mask on Chloe's face cracked. The fake smile wavered and died. We need to discuss Grandpa's inheritance, she said in an unnaturally soft, almost cloying voice, as if reciting a memorized line. Some questions have come up that, unfortunately, require a legal resolution. I straightened my back, feeling my fingers dig painfully into the thin strap of my purse, my only anchor in this hostile space. What questions, exactly? I asked sharply, abandoning all pretense of civility. Michael Stanton, with a light, polished gesture, pointed to the empty chair across from him. It wasn't a request but an order disguised as courtesy. I think you'll be more comfortable if you sit down, Ms. Reynolds. This is a serious matter concerning the principles of managing shared family capital. But I didn't budge. To sit down would mean accepting their rules, voluntarily taking my assigned seat in this performance. My hands, which had been clutching my purse, dropped to my sides and clenched into fists. First, tell me directly what this is about. Only then will I decide if it's worth sitting at this table at all. Chloe shot a panicked glance at our father. Richard cleared his throat awkwardly and looked down, unable to meet my direct gaze. Melissa, he began placatingly, your sister, she believes there are certain ambiguities in the inheritance. And her lawyers feel that this situation cannot be resolved without your constructive participation. Ambiguities? My voice rang out, echoing off the wooden panels of the room, louder than I intended. Grandpa made his wishes perfectly clear. Everything was divided equally. Ignoring my tone, Stanton opened a folder with the composure of a surgeon and took out several sheets, laying them neatly in front of him like playing cards. Ms. Reynolds, there are reasonable concerns about how you are managing your portion of the funds. Your sister, and by extension, us, have documents that indirectly suggest you may have made questionable financial decisions. Decisions that could, in the long term, jeopardize the entire family estate. For a moment, the room swam before my eyes. My head spun from the monstrous absurdity of the accusation. They were trying to paint me as unreliable? Me, who had preserved and grown my share, while Chloe had squandered hers in less than 2 years. This is absurd, I breathed, and in that moment, all illusions shattered. The dinner wasn't just a trap. It was a tribunal. Chloe leaned forward across the table, her face transformed. The strained smile was gone, replaced by a cold, businesslike determination. Just sign the papers, Melissa, she said in a flat, emotionless voice. It will be easier for all of us. As if on an invisible cue, Stanton smoothly pushed the open folder across the polished table toward me. This pertains to establishing a trust to manage your capital, he said in his even, almost lulling tone. It was the way a doctor might deliver bad news in the gentlest possible way. It's a standard procedure that will allow certified professionals to oversee the assets and ensure financial protection and stability for the entire family. I picked up the top document. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a rising, searing rage. The legal text was deliberately convoluted, a dense web of terms and footnotes, but its essence bled through with merciless clarity. They wanted to strip me of control over my own inheritance. When I reached the fine print at the bottom of the page, something inside me broke. A coldness that started in my stomach slowly crept through my veins, displacing the anger. The documents demanded that I transfer full control of my share to an asset management trust firm. And the co-founder of this firm, according to paragraph 7.2, was Chloe Evelyn Reynolds. This has to be some kind of joke, I said quietly, but each word fell into the silence of the room like a stone. The tension became almost palpable. Mr. Harper, a thin man in severe glasses, leaned forward, lacing his slender fingers together. Ms. Reynolds, his voice was as dry as rustling old papers, we have reason to doubt your financial judgment. Your refusal to participate in important family expenses, along with information about inconsistent spending, suggests that you may have difficulty managing such significant funds on your own. I couldn't help it. A short, bitter laugh escaped me against my will. The sound echoed off the walls of the room, sharp and out of place, like shattering glass. Inconsistent spending? Are you serious? I pressed my lips together, trying to maintain my composure. And on what, may I ask, is this conclusion based? Chloe immediately straightened up, adopting the pose of offended innocence she had perfected. Melissa, there's no need to react like that. You bought a very expensive car last year. And let's not forget your trip to Paris. Doesn't that prove you allow yourself expenditures that are inconsistent with reasonable planning? I barely stopped myself from slamming my hand on the table. An expensive car? It was a certified pre-owned sedan that I had spent 3 months researching after my old car finally broke down. And the trip to Paris? It was my only vacation in 2 years, one I had saved for by cutting back on everything Chloe wouldn't even think twice about. Those were normal, planned purchases, I said firmly, looking my sister directly in the eye. Reasonable and well considered. Unlike how you managed to burn through a 6-figure sum in less than 18 months. Mr. Caldwell, the third lawyer, interjected with a faint, almost pleased smirk. You see? Your defensive reaction speaks for itself. Denial of the problem is the first and surest warning sign. And in that moment, I understood. They had backed me into a psychological corner where my every word would be used against me. If I stayed silent, I was agreeing. If I defended myself, I was displaying aggression and instability. This wasn't just a trap. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Evelyn, my mother, leaned toward me gently across the table. Her movement was practiced, maternal, designed to soothe and disarm. Her voice was like velvet. Melissa, sweetie, we're not against you. We're just trying to help. Think how simple it will be. Professionals will handle your money, and you'll receive a fixed allowance every month. It's for your own security and peace of mind. An allowance. Receiving an allowance from my own earned and inherited money. The audacity of the idea took my breath away for a moment. In that instant, I understood with absolute clarity, this was not a family conversation. It was a conspiracy, meticulously constructed and performed by a cast of actors. Let me guess, I said, my gaze shifting from my mother to my sister. My voice was quiet. If something were to happen to me, or if I were declared incompetent, you, Chloe, would become the sole administrator of everything. A convenient setup, isn't it? Chloe's cheeks flushed a bright red. This isn't about me, she cried, but her voice wavered, betraying the lie. This is about preserving Grandpa's legacy. Grandpa's legacy. Those 2 words, spoken by her, shocked me more than all the threats and accusations that had come before. It was the final straw. I stood up abruptly, and my chair scraped back with a loud, protesting screech. All eyes were fixed on me. You're talking about legacy? I swept a cold gaze over all of them. You squandered your entire share on designer bags you carry once. On jewelry you can't afford. On nights at the casino and multiple luxury weekends that you later bragged about on social media. You turned his hard work into dust, and now you're reaching for my money, hiding behind his name. Michael Stanton, the lead lawyer, immediately intervened. The velvet tone was gone. Ms. Reynolds, I strongly advise you to consider your words and their potential consequences. Your sister has grounds and documents that, in her view, support your financial incompetence. In court, such matters are taken very seriously. Documents, my voice was sharp. Well, then, show them to me. Chloe eagerly grabbed her phone and, after quickly scrolling through her gallery, turned the screen toward the lawyers. Here. Screenshots from her social media. Dinners at expensive restaurants. Designer clothes. A new laptop. All of this demonstrates a clear tendency toward impulsive and reckless spending. She pushed the phone closer with a self-satisfied look. I glanced at the screen, and almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. The expensive restaurant was a photo from my birthday 6 months ago, where my friends had treated me to a celebratory dinner. The designer clothes was a simple work blazer I'd bought on sale for an important presentation. The new laptop was my only major purchase in 5 years, essential for my job after my old one died. These were all completely normal, planned events and expenses that Chloe had been collecting for months, now trying to present them as proof of my irresponsibility. The realization hit me with new force, and it became hard to breathe. You've been spying on me all this time? I asked, my voice betraying a tremor. Collecting every photo, every purchase? A tight, painful lump formed in my throat. This was no longer about money. This was about a betrayal so deep and calculated it was almost impossible to believe. I was worried about you, she replied, her voice carefully stripped of any hard edges. We were all worried. And then, for the first time that evening, my father, Richard, spoke. He didn't look at me, his gaze was fixed on the pattern of the tablecloth. Melissa, just sign the papers, he said wearily. His voice was devoid of strength, as if he had given up long ago and just wanted it all to be over. Stanton leaned back in his chair. There was no aggression in his posture, only the deep, unshakable calm of a man who holds all the cards and knows it. I'll be blunt, Ms. Reynolds. We have enough material to petition the court for a conservatorship, with or without your signature. If you agree tonight, everything will be handled quietly and without undue attention. And if I refuse? I asked, my eyes locked on Chloe. The shadow of sympathy on her face vanished completely, leaving only a cold glint in her eyes. She allowed herself a small, confident smile. Then we'll see you in court. And believe me, you don't want it to come to that. These men know exactly what they're doing. Her words weren't loud, but they filled the entire space, hanging in the air with a heavy, oppressive silence. I slowly looked around the room. My mother, with an expression of caring sorrow, my father, avoiding my gaze, my sister, filled with cold triumph. The people who were supposed to be my support, my family. But in that moment, something inside me changed irrevocably. Fear and confusion gave way to an absolute, ringing silence and clarity. They had all made the same mistake. They thought I was weak and could be broken. Michael Stanton neatly arranged the folder of documents in front of me, as if everything was already decided and only a formality remained. Ms. Reynolds, he said in a dispassionate business tone, there are 3 main agreements here. The first transfers your assets into a trust. The second grants management authority to Crestwood Financial Management. The third waives your right to challenge this decision in the future. I took the papers and pretended to read the text carefully. In reality, I needed to buy a few moments to steady the tremor in my hands and gather my thoughts. The text was filled with legal jargon, but certain phrases stood out on the page like warning signs: irrevocable transfer, permanent authority, full waiver of all claims. It's funny, I said thoughtfully, turning a page. For a document that's supposedly meant to help me, it looks more like a life sentence. Harper, the thin lawyer in glasses, adjusted his frames and replied with a hint of condescension, like a teacher explaining an obvious truth to a stubborn student. Long-term structures are the only way to ensure genuine stability. Short-term solutions do not address fundamental problems, Ms. Reynolds. Fundamental problems? I slowly raised my gaze from the papers, and my voice, though quiet, silenced everyone. Allow me to remind you, I have an MBA, I have never been late on a single payment in my life, and my credit score is over 800. What problems, exactly, are you referring to? Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her confidence wavering for a moment. Even a perfect credit score doesn't mean you know how to handle truly large sums of money, she said, a little louder than necessary, as if trying to convince herself as much as me. Your recent refusal to invest in important family needs only confirms that. Chloe. My mother, Evelyn, interjected softly, but her gaze immediately darted away, unable to withstand the tense atmosphere. I looked down at the documents again, scanning the lines. Suddenly, certain details I had initially missed became crystal clear. Crestwood Financial Management intended to charge a 3% annual management fee. The primary contact for all matters in the agreement was listed as Chloe. And a separate, inconspicuous clause provided for emergency disbursements to other family members in the event of documented need. The crystal clarity of it sent an unpleasant chill down my spine. I lifted my head and allowed myself a quiet, mirthless smile. A convenient scheme, I said. You get full access to my finances, and all you have to do is call any one of your whims at a crisis to get money for it. Caldwell, the third lawyer, leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. His voice was soft and enveloping, like someone trying to calm an irrationally frightened child. Ms. Reynolds, you're focusing too much on details that are not of primary importance right now. The main goal is to ensure your funds are under reliable professional supervision. By reliable supervision, do you mean the approach Chloe demonstrated with her share of the inheritance? I asked in the same calm tone. Perhaps we should be reminded of the purchases of expensive electronics, jewelry, and numerous trips, which she so loved to report on social media? My sister's face flushed with color. Her palm hit the table with a dull thud. That's enough. You see a catch in everything. It just proves you're incapable of thinking objectively. You're mistaken, I replied firmly, my voice gaining new strength. I'm looking at the situation with perfect clarity. You invited 4 lawyers here to pressure me because I refused to pay for your expensive plans. And now all of you are trying to present this ultimatum as concern for me. Michael Stanton's brow furrowed noticeably, and the last traces of patience vanished from his voice. Ms. Reynolds, I would advise you to be more careful with your words. Such statements are extremely serious. There was something in his tone that didn't fit the image. Over my years in the corporate world, I had dealt with top-tier lawyers. They were distinguished by their measured caution and impeccable precision in their phrasing. These men, however, were too openly and directly trying to intimidate and pressure me. It wasn't the subtle work of professionals, it was a crude assault. And this discrepancy, for the first time all evening, gave me a sliver of hope. May I see your Bar Association credentials? I asked, surprising everyone, including myself. A pause hung in the room, so thick you could almost hear it. Mr. Doyle, who had remained silent until now, frowned slightly. Excuse me? Your professional licenses, I repeated. If you are indeed licensed attorneys, it shouldn't be any trouble to prove it. Chloe's face turned pale. She spoke quickly, trying to seize the initiative. Melissa, that's completely unnecessary. These are respected professionals. In that case, they have nothing to hide, I replied evenly, trying to hide how fast my heart was beating. Stanton held my gaze, his voice as smooth as ever. Our licenses are in public state records. We don't carry them with us to business dinners. But real law firms always have business cards, official websites, and office phone numbers, I noted, listing the obvious. All of that information can be verified in a minute. Another long, tense silence followed. My parents looked completely bewildered, Chloe began to nervously fiddle with the edge of her napkin, and the four men in suits exchanged quick, barely perceptible glances. "This is a very strange turn for the conversation," Mr. Harper finally said, breaking the silence. "We came here to help your family." "I'm now questioning everything about this evening," I replied. "Including why a dinner you called a family reconciliation suddenly turned into a legal consultation." Chloe stood up abruptly, her chair scraping unpleasantly across the floor. "If you want to make this difficult, we'll just go to court. We have enough documentation to get a ruling through official channels." I looked at her, and in that moment, the entire picture fell into place. The persistent phone calls, the fake invitation, this staged meeting, every step had been planned in advance. But they had made one miscalculation. They assumed I would be scared. I carefully placed the stack of papers back on the table. Then I took out my phone and turned on the camera. A small red light glowed, confirming that everything happening in this room would now be recorded. "Before I sign anything," I said calmly, my voice finding a new, unshakable firmness, "I just need to make one phone call." "Melissa, that's not necessary," my mother interjected hastily, her voice anxious. "This is a family matter." "That's exactly why," I replied, not looking away from my phone screen as I slowly scrolled through my contacts. "If the matter is as serious as you claim, it's only right that my lawyer takes a look at these papers as well." Chloe turned visibly pale. The word lawyer, spoken by me, seemed to change the very atmosphere in the room. "Lawyer?" she repeated, almost in a whisper. "Yes, Chloe. Unlike some people, I prefer to consult with real professionals before making important financial decisions." I found the right number in my contacts and calmly pressed the call button. Michael Stanton still maintained his outward composure, but a new, hard edge had entered his voice. "Ms. Reynolds, involving another attorney will only unnecessarily prolong the process." "Perhaps," I replied, listening to the dial tone. "But I've learned one rule very well in my life: never sign anything until an expert I trust has reviewed the documents." Just then, a calm and confident female voice came through the phone. "Melissa," said Rachel Donovan, the attorney who had helped me buy my house 2 years ago. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you on a Saturday night. Is something wrong?" "Rachel, I'm sorry to bother you on a weekend, but I have an urgent situation. I'm at a restaurant with my family. There are several men here who have introduced themselves as lawyers, and they're pressuring me to sign papers to transfer my inheritance into a trust." There was a few seconds of silence on the other end. "Papers to transfer control?" Rachel asked again, and her voice was filled with professional alarm. "Melissa, listen to me very carefully. Do not sign anything. Not a single word. Where are you?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Chloe, who had overheard snippets of the conversation, stood up abruptly. Her face was a mixture of offense and panic. "This is ridiculous. We came here to help you, and you're acting like we're your enemies." I ended the call and looked directly into her eyes. My own fear had completely vanished, replaced by a cold calm. "I just want to make sure that everything happening here is legal and transparent. If your intentions are honest, a professional review will only confirm that, won't it?" My father, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. His voice was quiet and uncertain, but it held a clear sense of relief, as if he had been shown a way out of an unbearable situation. Maybe we really should wait until this Rachel gets here," he said, looking at Stanton. "Then we can discuss everything calmly, without rushing." That was the end. Their united front had crumbled. The pressure was no longer working. In that moment, I knew the game was over, and I had not lost. "No." Chloe's voice cracked into sharp, almost panicked notes. "She's signing this tonight, or on Monday, we file a lawsuit." Mr. Harper, seeing their plan collapse, shifted his tone to an almost pleading one. "Ms. Reynolds, please understand, bringing in another lawyer will create unnecessary complications and additional costs for everyone. These documents were drafted in your best interest." "Excellent," I replied firmly, feeling the ground beneath my feet grow solid. Then you certainly won't mind if we just wait for my lawyer to look them over. Silence fell over the room again, but this time it was different, not just tense, but expectant. Those 20 minutes seemed to stretch on for an eternity. The air in the room was thick with unspoken emotions. Chloe was whispering agitatedly to her lawyers, who replied in equally low tones. My parents looked completely lost. My father sat with an inscrutable expression, staring at a single point, while my mother fiddled with the edge of her napkin, her gaze darting between me and Chloe, clearly unsure whose side to take. Suddenly, the door to the room opened silently. On the threshold stood Rachel Donovan, calm, composed, with an elegant leather briefcase in her hand. There was no ostentatious severity about her, but in her every measured movement, in her clear and direct gaze, you could feel true professional strength. Good evening, she said in an even, neutral voice, her eyes sweeping over everyone present. I'm attorney Rachel Donovan. I was told my assistance was needed here. May I see the documents? Michael Stanton, with obvious reluctance, pushed the folder toward the center of the table. Rachel sat in the chair I offered, opened the folder, and began to read intently, slowly turning page after page. Not a single muscle twitched on her face, but I could see her eyes grow sterner as she read, her lips tightening into a thin, determined line. Well, this is quite a bold document, she finally said, closing the folder. Her voice was perfectly calm. What exactly is wrong with it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Practically everything, Rachel replied. The language regarding guardianship is extremely vague and lacks standard clauses for judicial oversight, which is unacceptable. The document transferring control to the financial company violates several state laws. And most interestingly, she paused briefly, the signatures of the supposed founders of this company on several pages do not match the names listed in the registration data. She raised her clear, piercing gaze to the men in suits, and her tone became pointedly official. Gentlemen, I'm going to need your bar license numbers for immediate verification through the official State Bar Association database. An absolute, ringing silence fell. Not one of the four men said a word. They just sat there, staring at the table, their confidence evaporated without a trace. The faintest hint of a smile touched Rachel's lips. It was not a smile of joy, but one of dry, professional satisfaction. Checkmate. I see, Rachel said. Her voice was level, devoid of any triumph, merely stating a fact. Melissa, these men are not licensed attorneys. Consequently, the papers they have presented to you have no legal force whatsoever. As if on cue, all the color drained from Chloe's face. My parents stared at her in horror, unable to utter a word. The four men, who had radiated confidence just moments before, began to hastily and clumsily gather their things, carefully avoiding eye contact. Their professional masks had crumbled, leaving only fidgeting and confusion. One moment, Rachel said quietly but authoritatively, and her voice made everyone freeze. She took out her phone. I don't think anyone will be leaving this room until we figure out who you really are and what exactly was happening here tonight. Michael Stanton, or whatever his real name was, made a last, feeble attempt to salvage the situation. Look, this is all just an unfortunate misunderstanding. Rachel, ignoring him, quickly typed something on her phone. The screen illuminated her serious, focused face. According to the official Kansas Bar Association database, she announced distinctly, raising her eyes, no one by the name of Michael Stanton, Mr. Harper, Mr. Caldwell, or Mr. Doyle is registered as a practicing attorney in this state. Chloe tensed. Her voice came out weak and unconvincing. There must be some mistake. These men are respected professionals. Rachel looked at her coldly. The real mistake, Chloe, is assuming that actions like these would have no consequences. My mother pushed her chair back with a scrape, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Chloe, what does all this mean? Explain it to us. Mom, I can explain everything. My sister began, but Rachel interrupted her gently, and the calmness in her voice only made it more unsettling. Attempting to use fraudulent legal documents and employing individuals impersonating attorneys to obtain someone else's property can be considered a very serious offense under state law. One of the lawyers made a quick move toward the door, but Rachel stopped him with a single glance. "I would stay put if I were you. I have already found it necessary to notify the Kansas City Police Department of a possible incident." As if to confirm her words, measured footsteps were heard from the far end of the hall, and a moment later, 2 uniformed officers appeared in the doorway of the private room. "Officers, good evening," Rachel said with the same confidence. "I'm attorney Rachel Donovan. There may have been an attempt at fraud here involving impersonation and falsified credentials." Chloe slowly sank into her chair, her shoulders slumping. All her former energy and audacity had vanished without a trace. The 4 men froze in place, looking bewildered at the arriving police. My father, who had been silent until then, finally looked at his younger daughter, and in his eyes, there was no anger, only a heavy, boundless exhaustion and disappointment. "Chloe, what have you done?" My sister didn't raise her head. She spoke quietly into the tablecloth. "I just wanted the money." Her voice was a barely audible whisper, containing nothing but bitter, pathetic truth. As the officers politely but firmly asked their questions, Chloe's entire simple scheme began to unravel. In the dim light of the restaurant, the drama descended into a farce. It turned out that the 4 men were not lawyers at all. They were aspiring actors Chloe had found through an online gig service, promising each of them $300 to convincingly play the role of experienced attorneys during an important family discussion. The documents they had laid out on the table with such confidence were mere forgeries, templates downloaded from the internet. Chloe had filled them in herself with grand-sounding phrases that were impressive but held no legal weight. Even Crestwood Financial Management, the firm meant to manage my money, existed only on paper. Chloe had registered it just a few weeks prior, creating an empty shell for her plan. "There is clear evidence of premeditation here," Rachel Donovan stated in a calm voice, addressing the officers. "This was not an improvisation. Organizing this performance took time, money, and a certain amount of calculation." My parents sat in a heavy, deafening silence. It seemed they had aged several years in the last hour. The daughter they had always protected and coddled had turned out to be the organizer of a complex and deliberate attempt to defraud me of my inheritance. One of the officers turned to me, his voice calm and official. "Ms. Reynolds, given the testimony and materials collected, we have sufficient grounds to detain your sister on charges related to fraud and the use of fictitious documents." I looked at Chloe. She sat with her face in her hands, her shoulders slumped. For a moment, a shadow of pity stirred deep inside me, but it was immediately replaced by another, stronger feeling, a cold and clear understanding that justice had found its way. She had taken a huge risk, and her plan had collapsed under the weight of its own lies. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Rachel answered before the officer could, her voice confident and firm. "Chloe will be detained for further investigation, and formal charges will be filed. And, Melissa, there's something else you should know. Your grandfather's will contains a specific clause. Any proven attempt by one heir to fraudulently acquire the share of another automatically disqualifies them from their own inheritance." Chloe jerked her head up, her tear-filled eyes wide with horror and disbelief. "What?" Rachel gave a calm nod, but her words were like steel. "Your grandfather, apparently, foresaw situations like this. He took steps to protect you from such attempts in advance." The months that followed that night became a slow, draining process, a series of court hearings, depositions, and endless discussions. In the end, Chloe was found guilty on several serious counts. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay significant restitution for fraud. It wasn't a cause for celebration, just a quiet, bitter end to the saddest chapter in our family's history. The consequences for Chloe were swift and inevitable, like dominoes falling one after another. Her employers at the recruiting agency terminated her contract as soon as the case became public. The reputation she had valued so much was destroyed. No reputable company would have her. Tyler, her fiancé, whose approval she had so desperately sought, broke off the engagement just a week after the details of the scandal became public knowledge. At first, my parents tried to make excuses for her, repeating that she had just made a mistake out of desperation. But soon, the facts became undeniable, and they had to face the bitter truth: the forged documents, the fake company, the hired actors. Their beloved younger daughter was a person who had coolly and consciously orchestrated a complex scheme of deceit. The public condemnation in our small city was so intense that my parents eventually made the difficult decision to move to another state, starting a quiet life away from the constant scrutiny and whispered gossip. The 4 actors Chloe had dragged into her scheme explained to the court that they too had been victims of her manipulation, believing they were participating in some kind of family prank. The court showed them leniency, giving them probation and mandatory community service. Their full cooperation with the investigation helped secure a sentence for Chloe that reflected the full gravity of her actions. I stood at the tall doors of the courthouse, watching as 2 guards led Chloe down a long, echoing corridor. Her shoulders were hunched, and her once confident stride had become slow and submissive. 2 feelings mingled in my chest: a quiet relief that this long and painful process was finally over, and a deep, aching sadness at the realization that our family would never be the same. Rachel Donovan, my lawyer and the person who had become a true pillar of support for me over these months, stood beside me. "You handled this magnificently," she said in her quiet, confident voice. "Your grandfather would undoubtedly be proud of your composure and strength." Those words felt like a soft and warm conclusion to this difficult journey. I invested a portion of the inheritance I had managed to protect into creating the Patrick Reynolds Scholarship Fund. The fund helps pay for the education of young women who, like Rachel, are studying to become lawyers and are dedicated to defending justice. In a bitter irony, a beautiful purpose was born. Out of a cruel attempt to deprive me of my means came a cause that would now support and give a chance to others. When I think back to that night in the restaurant, everything becomes perfectly clear. Chloe's biggest mistake wasn't just that she overestimated her own cunning and underestimated my intelligence. Her real, fundamental error was that she mistook my kindness for weakness. She thought my willingness to help made me vulnerable. But it was that very trait, inherited from my grandfather, that gave me the strength to fight and stand firm until the end. I walk out of the massive courthouse. The soft light of the evening sun plays on the wide steps, and all around me is the ceaseless, vibrant hum of the city, pulling me back to a normal life. And I think that sometimes the best victory isn't a loud argument or a scandal. The real victory is simply allowing the truth to speak for itself.